Nobody inside the stadium understood what they had just witnessed. At first, it looked like an ordinary emotional reaction after a painful loss. A frustrated coach walking across the field. Angry players heading back toward the dugout. Fans booed loudly while the Dodgers celebrated another dramatic victory. But then the cameras zoomed in. And suddenly the entire feeling around the stadium changed. Because standing near the foul line, only a few feet away from Shohei Ohtani, was a Brewers coach screaming something so aggressively that even the broadcasters stopped talking mid-sentence. Ohtani froze for a moment. Dodgers players immediately turned around. And within seconds, millions of people watching live realized this was no longer normal baseball frustration. What happened after the game shocked the entire nation, not because of how loud the reaction was, but because of who it was directed at. Shohei Ohtani had just become the center of one of the ugliest post-game moments baseball had seen all season. The game itself had already been emotionally exhausting long before the final out. Dodgers vs. Brewers had slowly transformed into one of the most heated matchups in baseball over the previous few weeks. Every game carried tension. Every close pitch triggered reactions from both dugouts. And every time Shohei Ohtani stepped into the batter's box, the atmosphere inside the stadium shifted completely. Milwaukee pitchers worked carefully around him all night, but it barely mattered. Ohtani still controlled the energy of the game almost by himself. Earlier in the evening, he had launched a towering home run deep into right center field that completely changed the momentum of the series opener. The stadium erupted so loudly after the ball disappeared into the seats that even the Brewers' dugout looked rattled for several innings afterward. But what truly frustrated Milwaukee was not just Ohtani's talent. It was his calmness. No matter how emotional the game became, Ohtani never reacted outwardly. Brewers pitchers tried crowding him inside repeatedly throughout the night. One fastball nearly clipped his hands in the fourth inning. Another pitch rode dangerously high near his shoulder in the sixth. The crowd booed aggressively each time. Dodgers players shouted from the dugout. Yet Ohtani never stared toward the mound. Never pointed fingers. Never escalated anything. He simply adjusted his batting gloves and kept playing baseball like nothing around him could break his concentration. Somehow, that calmness seemed to frustrate Milwaukee even more. The Brewers had opportunities to win the game late. In the eighth inning, they loaded the bases with one out against the Dodgers bullpen. The crowd inside the stadium grew tense. Milwaukee's dugout exploded with energy. It felt like the turning point of the night. But then came the moment that changed everything. The Dodgers induced a brutal double play to escape the inning, and as the stadium erupted in relief, cameras briefly caught several Brewers players slamming equipment near the dugout steps. The frustration was becoming impossible to hide. Ohtani, standing near the top step of the Dodgers dugout, simply watched quietly while chaos unfolded around him. Then came the ninth inning. The Dodgers were clinging to a one-run lead. The entire stadium stood on its feet. Brewers hitters battled desperately to keep the game alive while Dodgers fans screamed at every strike. Finally, with 2 outs and a full count, the last Milwaukee batter swung through a fastball and the game ended instantly. Dodger Stadium exploded with noise. Players rushed onto the field celebrating while the Brewers stood frozen in disappointment. It should have been the end of the story. Instead, it became the beginning. As Dodgers players gathered near the mound celebrating the victory, Ohtani started walking calmly toward the dugout. That was when the cameras caught movement near the Brewers' side. One Milwaukee coach suddenly stormed out from the dugout area visibly furious. At first, nobody thought much of it. Emotional reactions happen after difficult losses. But then the coach turned directly toward Ohtani and started screaming. The broadcast microphones did not fully capture the words clearly, but the tone alone stunned everyone watching. The coach pointed aggressively toward Ohtani while shouting across the foul line. Ohtani stopped walking immediately and looked back in confusion. Several Dodgers players instantly turned around after realizing what was happening. Mookie Betts took a few quick steps toward the situation. Max Muncy looked furious. Even the umpires appeared caught off guard by the intensity of the confrontation. The stadium became strangely quiet for a moment because fans were trying to understand what they were seeing. Then the replay appeared on the giant screen. And suddenly the entire crowd erupted into angry boos. The Brewers coach was still yelling while pointing toward Ohtani long after the game had already ended. One camera angle appeared to show him making an aggressive gesture with his hands while players from both teams started moving toward the area near the foul line. The broadcasters sounded stunned. One commentator stopped speaking completely before finally saying something that instantly spread across social media. "I cannot believe a coach is doing this right now." That sentence captured exactly how strange the moment felt. Baseball players lose control emotionally sometimes. Bench-clearing arguments happen. But seeing a coach aggressively confront Shohei Ohtani after the game itself had already ended felt completely different. The tension escalated almost immediately. Dodgers coaches rushed toward the area trying to separate players while Brewers staff members pulled their coach backward toward the dugout. Ohtani remained standing near the foul line with a confused expression more than an angry one. That detail somehow made the moment feel even uglier. He did not appear aggressive. He did not yell back. He simply stood there while chaos exploded around him publicly. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media everywhere. Fans replayed the footage repeatedly trying to understand what triggered the outburst. Some believed the Brewers coach was furious about Ohtani's home run earlier in the game. Others thought comments exchanged during previous innings may have carried over emotionally after the loss. But what made the situation truly explode nationally was another camera angle that surfaced later that night. The angle appeared to show the Brewers coach continuing to shout toward Ohtani even while being physically restrained by other Milwaukee staff members. That replay changed everything. Because now the confrontation no longer looked like a quick emotional reaction. It looked personal. Inside the Dodgers clubhouse afterward, the mood reportedly felt tense and protective almost immediately. The players were angry. Coaches were furious. Several Dodgers veterans allegedly believed the Brewers coach had crossed a line that baseball usually respects automatically. Emotional arguments between players happen constantly. But coaches are expected to calm situations down, not escalate them further. That was the detail making so many people inside baseball uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the Brewers clubhouse carried a completely different atmosphere. Reporters described the room as unusually quiet. Several Milwaukee players reportedly avoided eye contact with media members altogether. The coach involved in the confrontation did not immediately speak publicly, which only intensified speculation online. Fans demanded explanations. Sports television shows replayed the footage non-stop. And slowly, the conversation around baseball shifted from surprise to outrage. When Dave Roberts entered the press conference room later that night, the atmosphere instantly became silent. Reporters already knew what the first question would be. Roberts sat down slowly in front of the microphone, folded his hands together, and briefly stared toward the floor before looking up again. A reporter finally asked him directly what he thought about the confrontation involving the Brewers coach and Shohei Ohtani after the game. Roberts paused for several long seconds before answering. "There are emotions after tough losses," he said quietly. "But there are certain things you just cannot do." The room became completely silent. Another reporter asked whether Roberts believed Ohtani had been disrespected publicly. This time Roberts leaned back slightly before answering more carefully. "Shohei handled it with more class than almost anyone else would have." That sentence exploded across sports media almost instantly. Because people watching the replay already felt the same way. Ohtani had not escalated the confrontation. He had not shouted back. He had not pointed toward the Brewers' dugout. Instead, he simply stood there calmly while a coach screamed toward him in front of millions of viewers. And somehow, that calmness made the scene feel even more uncomfortable nationally. Then came the moment that changed the story completely. Late that night, another video surfaced online from a fan seated near the first base line. Unlike the television broadcast angle, this footage captured part of the audio more clearly. While not every word was understandable, the aggressive tone from the Brewers coach became unmistakable. Social media exploded instantly. Fans across the country demanded disciplinary action. Former players appearing on television the next morning openly criticized the behavior. One analyst said something that quickly went viral. If players acted like that toward a coach after the game, there would be consequences immediately. And according to reports emerging only hours later, Major League Baseball had already begun reviewing the incident officially. That almost never happens for post-game verbal confrontations. But this situation had become too public to ignore. By the next morning, every major sports network in America opened with the same footage. Ohtani walking calmly after the final out. The Brewers coach storming toward him. The shouting. The aggressive pointing. Dodgers players reacting instantly. The replay rolled non-stop while commentators debated whether the confrontation represented a deeper frustration growing around baseball whenever teams face Ohtani. Because whether people admit it publicly or not, Shohei Ohtani changes emotional dynamics inside games completely. Pitchers become tense. Managers overthink decisions. Opposing dugouts feel pressure building every time he approaches the plate. And when he dominates games quietly without showing emotion himself, frustration can grow even faster on the other side. Several former players suggested exactly that during television discussions the following day. One analyst explained that Ohtani's calmness sometimes makes emotional opponents unravel even more. He never gives you anything emotionally, the analyst said. That can drive competitors crazy. The situation became even worse for Milwaukee after reports surfaced that league officials were especially concerned by the timing of the confrontation. The game was already over. Players were leaving the field. Which meant the aggressive reaction toward Ohtani could not be defended as heat-of-the-moment competition anymore. According to insiders, that detail played a major role in MLB's response. Then came the announcement that stunned people around baseball. Major League Baseball officially confirmed disciplinary action against the Brewers coach involved in the confrontation with Shohei Ohtani. Suspensions were handed down immediately. Financial penalties followed. And according to the league statement, the punishment specifically referenced aggressive post-game conduct directed toward an opposing player. The baseball world reacted instantly. Some fans argued the punishment was excessive. Others believed MLB had no choice after how public the incident became. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. The footage looked terrible for Milwaukee. Ironically, through all the chaos, the calmest voice in the entire story remained Shohei Ohtani himself. When reporters finally asked him directly about the confrontation the following afternoon, Ohtani stood quietly near his locker and answered softly. One reporter asked whether he felt disrespected by what happened after the game. Ohtani paused briefly before speaking. "I understand emotions after difficult games." The room became completely silent. Another reporter asked whether he was angry about the confrontation. Ohtani lowered his eyes for a moment before answering again. "I just want baseball to stay respectful." That sentence spread everywhere online within minutes. Because while the baseball world screamed around him, Shohei Ohtani once again refused to escalate anything publicly. And somehow that made the entire situation feel even heavier. Millions of fans had watched a furious coach publicly explode toward the biggest star in baseball after a loss. They watched players rush toward the scene. They watched the entire stadium react in disbelief. And in the middle of all of it, Ohtani simply stood there calmly while the sport around him seemed to lose control completely.